The heroine still remembers that day, because it was a very ordinary day that did not foreshadow anything special. The girl walked through the field and enjoyed the pleasant breeze that ruffled her hair. It was one of countless days working in the herb field. But at some point, a strange voice sounded in front of the girl. The voice was accompanied by a bright light and asked, "Could it really be Lottie?" Lottie was surprised to confirm that it was her. A voice descended from the sky and spoke to Lottie. Lottie could not believe her eyes, because it turned out to be a strange man to resemble God, according to the stories. He said that he was going to give Lottie an assignment. If Lottie hadn't listened to that voice and run away, then all the rest would never have happened to her, and she would have lived her normal life. In this world, there appears to be an all-powerful God that rules the world. God is a creator who works wonders and cares for the world. Next to the main God, there are 12 other gods who help this great being with his tasks. Countless people have received a message from God through priests. But since Lottie was not a believer, she thought it had nothing to do with God. Lottie was surprised that God decided to contact Lottie personally. God told Lottie to prepare a magic elixir because he noticed the girl's skills. God asked for the elixir of the immortality of the gods. The girl shook with incomprehensible feelings that began to bubble up in her body. Why would God want an elixir of immortality? Lottie realizes that this elixir is impossible to create, even if you spend your whole life on it. Lottie tells the great being that she can't do it. This task, but God says he can give Lottie another life. The girl wonders what kind of life God is talking about, but a strange being of omnipotent knowledge put his seal on the girl's forehead. It was the touch of God. And he tells the girl that if Lottie succeeds in preparing this elixir, her whole life everyone will worship her, and even the gods will recognize the new heroine. God will put Lottie in the place of one of the 12 gods, and she will become a supreme being. The girl was incredibly frightened, but at the same time, hope bellowed in her heart. If she could become a goddess. The girl realizes she'd rather be a goddess. But she's sure God was talking about new life, and it probably means something else. Will Lottie study herbalism until she dies? And perhaps God means that the girl will study herbs even after death. Lottie realizes that she was very naive at the time. The girl agreed with God and said she would try her hand. The girl promised that she would make the elixir for God as he asked and put her hand on her heart, for she was with him sincerely. She accepted God's offer. So began her new life. Lottie remembers that she had problems with a boyfriend and studied herbal medicine for a long time. Through this research in the field of herbal treatment, it has developed phenomenally and gained all scientific recognition. He died less than a year later in the body of a 3-year-old baby. It was only when Lottie was older that she was able to recover her memories and recall everything. Lottie should have realized that she would mess it up, so she should have anticipated it and disagreed. The age at which Lottie's God restores God's memories was certain, and the rebirth cycle was also random. Moreover, Lottie didn't understand why the science of herbs regressed with each rebirth. The girl was incredibly upset by this fact. In this life of the girl needs to develop a cure for hair loss because Lottie was in the body of a bald man. In her first life, Lottie turned into a goblin, which was incredibly frustrating. The girl thought it was an incredible curse that God had bestowed upon her. A second life of wandering. Still couldn't keep up with the girl's progress. Lottie couldn't figure out what was wrong, and everything seemed very strange. In the fourth life, a dragon came to Lottie's door, and they became friends after they drank alcohol together. In the fifth life, Lottie was finally born a long-time resident and became a mermaid. Lottie didn't understand how one could study herbs underwater, and it turned out that Lottie was a very bad singer, which was incredibly bad in the world of mermaids. In her next life, Lottie died as soon as the memories came back, because the demon king killed everyone, and the kingdom was destroyed in the demon fire that raged across the continent. In her eighth life, she was finally born an elf who could spend a great deal of time in nature, and the girl had the opportunity to study herbs in the elf forests. If Lottie took good care of herself, she could easily live 1,000 years. But only 10 years after Lottie's memories of her past life returned to her, she contracted a terrible elven disease that was then beginning to affect the elven population and died. Lottie was very surprised that elves were sick at all. In her 9th life, Lottie was able to prepare her first elixir, and it is imperfect but good enough, to present to the gods as an example. God said it looked good enough, and he praised Lottie. To rise to the position of God, you must create the perfect elixir. That will be better than any elixir that has ever existed, so Lottie. More perfection is yet to come. Lottie was incredibly disappointed because at the moment that was all the girl was capable of. The girl asked God to let her choose her next life because she was tired of being in spontaneous bodies that were not meant for learning herbs and healing. God said it was impossible, but he would send her straight to the next life. Lottie didn't understand. Would it be some kind of portal? And after God winked at Lottie, she realized that she wanted to hit this god who had been annoying the girl for a long time. Lottie's hands even began to shake with anger, and now Lottie was reborn into her present life. Memories from her past lives came flooding back to her, and the girl began to cry at the realization of her difficult lot. She was reborn again and remembered her first and subsequent lives. Lottie understood the bitterness of fate. Lottie saw the same sky as when she first met God. The girl was incredibly surprised to find herself in a real cycle of rebirths. Lottie didn't understand what kind of gods are mean with their stupid and illogical rebirths that Lottie can't predict. Lottie was angry that the gods would sit behind those clouds and drink her elixir, while the girl works endlessly to make the best elixir for the gods. Lottie asks, "Is she going to die here again?" Lottie ran out to the tallest building and looked up into the sky. She said her name was Lottie, and from that moment on, she told all the gods and all the people of this world that she's on strike. Now, to be honest, she doesn't want to work because she's tired. Lottie wants at least some time to rest, because the work has taken several dozen lives that have already really exhausted the girl. For starters, Lottie decides to look at this body and recognizes it. Is she really 13 or 14 years old? Lottie wonders if she will remember the knowledge of the body afterwards. She walks around the property and tries to find out as much as she can about herself. Lottie looks in the mirror and realizes she looks pretty cute enough. Girls like the way she shows herself off to others. However, she realizes that something is obviously wrong with her. When she coughs, she sees blood on her hand, and it really scares Lottie. A girl decides to have her body examined and doesn't understand why she has no pain anywhere, because there are clearly certain signs that the girl is sick. If there is no pain anywhere, what does that mean? If it is a body with a limited lifespan, she turns out to be like a fish that will die very quickly, and the girl will not have time to enjoy her vacation in any way because she has gone on strike to the gods. Lottie begins to remember in the next moment that she is a great herbalist on the level of the gods and realizes that there is nothing wrong with her illness because with the help of her knowledge, she will be able to prolong life in other ways. If she becomes a wizard of the 8th level, the duration of life will increase, and that takes mana. But mana isn't enough. You need an ingredient. It would be ideal if Lottie could become a sword master, but unfortunately that doesn't exist. Lottie thinks about spiritual enlightenment or divine power, but unfortunately she doesn't know about these things either and can't think of anything. Lottie begins to realize that this body probably doesn't know how to do anything, and there are no powers here. The princess is visited by a knight who was running after her the whole time when the girl rushed to strike the gods. Lottie realized that she had just been told that she was a princess, and it turns out that although the girl is not a great mage or swordsman, but she's a princess, and that's a good thing in its own way. She has the money she needs and the influence. Knight says that he was very much worried about Lottie, and he is afraid that the girl ran away so quickly because she is ill. The girl realizes that this is the emblem of the kingdom of Pandarion, and she is the princess of this kingdom. Lottie remembers this kingdom from a past life. Lottie asks the knight, "Is he from the kingdom of Pandarion?" And the knight confirms it. Lottie says that means she is the princess of that kingdom. The knight looks at the girl uncomprehendingly and says that she is right. He is very concerned after all. Has the girl lost her memory? What is she asking about such obvious things? The girl realizes that she has nothing, but luckily she has power, and that's much better, because in all the time she's been reborn, she's never had power. so she thinks she'll use that power and money to her advantage. This kingdom has existed for over 1,000 years, and she's a princess of the Great Kingdom, most likely won't be threatened by anything. It also means she has a lot of money and can buy any ingredients she wants for herself. The body doesn't function well, so there's no need to work hard anyway. You can just prolong life with expensive drugs. Lottie points her finger and says she's tired, so he tells the girl to get some rest. Lottie was incredibly surprised when she entered her quarters. I couldn't understand if this was a real prison, for this room looked more like a prison than a princess's room, and it was not how Lottie had envisioned the room of a princess of a very powerful kingdom. But jokingly, Lottie thought it was probably the room of some not-so-expensive tavern, but not the princess's room. The knight says in surprise that this is the prison, and Lottie is genuinely frightened by his words. The knight says that in addition to being a prison, it is also the room of Her Royal Highness Princess Lottie. Lottie is surprised that in this life, her name is also Lottie, and it seems that she has to pretend that she has memory problems, so she asks the knight to explain everything to her as best as possible. Lottie asks, is she the king's illegitimate daughter or the daughter of his second wife? But the knight smiles and says it's not true. Lottie asks that she must have done something wrong because she can't understand why she is in such a horrible room with such terrible furnishings. The knight says that it is not true and that Her Royal Highness has been arrested for trying to poison Her Majesty, the former queen. Lottie was incredibly shocked to learn this information. Is she the real culprit for wanting to kill a man? Lottie doesn't believe what the knight says. While Lottie was talking to the knight, she saw a mouse that lived in her room, or rather in a real prison. Lottie sits down in favor of the embryo and hugs her knees and wonders what is even going on here. After all, she doesn't have a single life when she doesn't have some problem. Then she's a mermaid when she should be practicing herbs, or she's an all-powerful wizard, but only bald. Lottie doesn't understand why it's always in every life. She has a disadvantage that prevents her from living her life normally and enjoying her time in the world. Every time she tries, she gets a slap in the face. The princess is terminally ill and has no talents and is also in prison. This is truly a real jackpot of bad luck. The good news is that Lottie escaped during her walk. Under those circumstances, she could die and be reborn again. After all, she has lung problems, and such physical exertion is contraindicated for a princess. Lottie has declared that she will no longer make the elixir, which means that when she dies, karma is imminent, when God finally gets to her soul. So Lottie must do whatever it takes to find a way out and live her life, as long as she can to avoid the nasty gods. But first, she needs to clear her head. But when the girl came to the bucket where there should be water, she was surprised that there was no water there, and the girl realizes that she will have to try to call the spirits, because the girl, it was able to do it in the past life. It turns out that the princess's body is capable of a little magic, and she was able to summon small little water spirits to help her with the water. She doesn't know how to summon strong spirits, but she can manage with this kind of small magic. The girl's soul exudes the Spirit King's energy, and the little spirits notice it, so they are really happy to have met such a strong aura of the Spirit King. Although the girl's body is not capable of concentrating large amounts of magic, her soul exudes a magical aura that was able to develop in past lives. The clever spirit asks the girl, has she made some kind of strong contract? And Lottie confirms that she has made a contract with her soul with the spirit of the fourth royal generation. In her past rebirths, Lottie met the fourth Spirit King and signed a contract. This contract was very useful for Lottie. A spirit contract is a soul contract, so she can summon the Spirit King in any body. If Lottie stays in this body, she'll die. The spirits say that they have understood Lottie perfectly and that she is a human being, but she is a contracted member of the fourth king, and they ask, is Lottie a traveler? The spirits are very happy to meet Lottie. Lottie says that she is not a traveler, but rather a tramp, and asks the spirits to bring her some water to wash herself. The spirits, and some intelligent beings who knew Lottie's identity, called her a traveler. Apparently, these beings understood something about what happens to Lottie after death. When the spirits drew a tub of water, they asked Lottie if it was enough for the traveler. Lottie was incredibly surprised that the water was very clean and was able to wash herself. The girl thanked her spirits for their help and said that she would want to call them more than once, so let them not go far away. Usually, when Lottie's memories are transferred, she mentally returns to her past incarnations. She needs to go to the forest of Ranis in the center of the continent. There are thousands of monsters, as well as orcs, trolls, and even dragons, and in the midst of all this horror, Lottie will find what she needs. The girl wants to find the tower that belongs to her. This is her heavenly laboratory, where dangerous experiments can never cause problems, and near this tower grew rare herbs that Lottie used to study the necessary potions, and also to create them, and to finally create the elixir for the immortality of the gods, and to become one of the 12 gods. The problem is that if Lottie continues to live in this body, she will die. In order to survive, she must first stay here for a while to settle in and learn her new body. Anyway, she was caught trying to poison the former emperor, but the girl wonders how she's still alive. It's a miracle Lottie wasn't summarily executed. Lottie doesn't understand why she's still breathing and hasn't been killed. Some man walks in on Lottie and yells that she's a dirty cow. The girl sees it's some little boy. That he says he heard from the guard that Lottie lost her memory and the boy. I'm sorry to hear such news. He smiles evilly and says that Dirty Bitch has lost her memory and he's incredibly happy about the news. The butler comes in and he keeps smiling and saying that Mudblood has lost his memory and it makes him incredibly happy, so the guy can continue to abuse Lottie further. The guy asks, does Lottie think that if she kills the king she can hide her dirty blood? The guy is obsessed with blood and what it is. But Lottie somehow looks behind the guy and he notices her strange look and asks, doesn't Lottie listen to him? Lottie admits that she didn't really listen to the guy and apologizes for it. Lottie very cryptically says that she doesn't know who's in front of her. After all, she has lost her memory, and although the girl has a little bit of a clue, the boy says that in front of Lottie is the second prince of the Ponderon royal family, and his name is Arkan Ponderon, and Lottie must show him the necessary respect to honor the great prince. Lottie was not at all surprised at what the prince said and agreed with him, calling him Arkan. The boy began to resent Lottie for showing more respect in addressing the prince. Lottie interested. Why the respect for the little prince? Lottie looks at this guy's face and realizes there's something wrong with him. Lottie Wonderful realizes what her life here has been like. She has been bullied by her family and the public and has begun to repay them in kind. Lottie sighs and realizes that she needs to communicate with Arkan as best she can to find out the things she needs to know. Lottie asks if Arkan wants her to call him Prince. Lottie asks if she was the one who tried to kill the queen. Lottie asks Arkan to tell her what happened after the attempted poisoning. Lottie suspects that her memory will return if the prince tells her about the situation. Arkan realizes that Lottie has changed and she is different now. Her Majesty fainted when Lottie had tea alone with her, said it was the tea that had poison in it that Lottie had slipped it to Her Majesty. The maid showed what tea had been brewed for Her Majesty. Arkan accusingly points out that it was Lottie's fault. Lottie smiles gratefully and says that she very much sincerely wishes Arkan all the best for choosing to share this important information with her. Lottie realizes that what was happening was very obvious. After all, strength and ability is the reason why the princess with poor health and tried to poison the queen. But Lottie clenches her fists and realizes it doesn't matter because the charges are false and the court didn't have enough evidence to prove Lottie guilty. Lottie says she has to go somewhere and has a lot of work to do, so she says goodbye to the prince. The knight who is supposed to be by Lottie's side the whole time tells her to wait. Arkan stands in front of Lottie and says she can't go. A criminal can't just walk out of prison, and it's a punishment to make her feel uncomfortable. The knight says that the king has ordered that if Lottie escapes again, she will die. Arkan says that's why Lottie must return to her chambers sooner than later, so the king won't kill her. Lottie realizes it's cute enough when they try to save her life, but she still won't give in to them. The princess asks that Arkan calm down. Lottie wants to go for a walk, and it's a privilege to be a member of the Ponderon royal family. The princess says that if she wants to go for a walk, she has every right to do so. People around here were incredibly surprised that Lottie would say such a thing. But the princess says that even if a member of the royal family commits a crime, he can still go out with an escort, and he can stay in certain areas. The butler says that Lottie is right in her assertions and that such a law does exist, and it is the privilege of the highest members of the royal families. Arkin doesn't understand why he never knew about it. Lottie says that usually the attendants would be vassals or relatives, but Lottie is no one to Arkin. Arkin sees how upset Lottie was at the thought, so says it's no big deal and takes the girl's hand to escort her out. Arkin leaves with Lottie, and the butler asks His Majesty to wait, and never left without a butler. Arkin says that he will now accompany the princess. Lottie is finally glad that Arkin was able to fall for this ruse, for Lottie had originally planned all her actions and emotions to make the boy feel sorry for her. The princess comes to see the king, whose name is Aaron, and who rules Bandarian. The king asks what Lottie wants to tell him. Lottie realizes that this is not how parents usually communicate and look at their children. She realizes that Lottie has done something very wrong. The king asks Arkin, what was he thinking when he brought the criminal here, and the boy was very frightened by his father's words. Arkin starts to justify himself and tells his father that he didn't mean to make him angry, and it just happened. But Lottie interrupts Arkin and apologizes to the king and asks that His Majesty not blame Arkin for bringing a criminal here. Lottie says she was the one who asked Arkin for the boy to bring her, so she apologizes to the king. Lottie says she just wants to clear her name. The king says he has heard that Lottie has lost her memory and how she is going to prove that she has been wrongly accused. Lottie realizes that that's not what a father-child conversation is supposed to be. And in their case, the girl is talking. As a daughter, and usually daughters are treated more gently than sons. In addition, Lottie realizes that the king did not ignore her words, which in its own way is a good sign. Lottie realizes that talking to the king will be a problem. She looks at his horrifying eyes that stare down at the girl disparagingly. Lottie may be wrong, but as long as her life is in danger, she will leave these worries for later. Lottie says she has one request. The girl says it's a request that won't take long. Arkin asks what his sister wants. The king looks at us in wonder at his daughter, who is getting closer and closer to him. Lottie says that if the king allows her to meet the former queen, then the girl will be incredibly grateful to her father for this. Lottie says that if she meets the queen, she will prove that she was framed, and Lottie did not capture the queen. The king rises from his seat and is truly surprised, but when he looked at his daughter's confidence, he decided to sit down and carefully dry. The king tells Lottie that Her Majesty the Queen is at death's door. The king doesn't understand. Does the daughter want to come to the queen who could die at any hour? The king casts a very hard look at Lottie, making her feel insecure. The king says to put the criminal in jail immediately. Lottie says that 1 hour will be enough for her and leaves the king to give her just 1 hour. The girl meets the king's eyes as well and looks at him confidently without expressing fear at the sight of His Highness. Arkin looks at Lottie and doesn't understand. She has lost her mind, and if she can't prove her case, she will either be killed or killed immediately by Kara. But Lottie tries to tell Arkin that everything will be all right and not to let her brother worry about it. The king thinks for a while, and after his deliberations says that he agrees to his daughter's terms. Lottie shines with happiness and realizes that an hour is certainly not enough, but she must cope. And the king says his new condition is that he's only giving Lottie 30 minutes. Lottie realizes it's a real setup. And maybe it's all God's fault that he heard that Lottie went on strike, and now he's meddling in Lottie's affairs to make her life as difficult as possible. It would be profitable for God to pull strings to make Lottie suffer as much as possible and die sooner, to take Lottie's soul and deduct it for the unspecified day off that Lottie wanted to take. The girl enters the room of the Empress and sees that the woman is in a terrible state. Lottie realizes that she looks much worse than Lottie had imagined before, especially the woman's breathing is very weak. The girl hopes that it is because of her age and the woman will be able to live for some time. Lottie begins to take a closer look and uses the skills she has learned in her past lives. Lottie realizes that it's not poison, and if the woman wasn't poisoned with poison, she probably ate something wrong. The official version of how Lottie poisoned the queen was that Lottie gave tea leaves that were popular in the capital and nothing special about them, but somehow the court still managed to accuse that it was Lottie who somehow poisoned those leaves. Lottie realizes that there was no poison in the tea, but she was still being held captive. The maid who was standing nearby says it's only been 2 days since they got the results. Lottie asks if they checked the other foods Her Highness was eating at the time. She fainted after drinking the tea. The man says there was no poison in the tea or the cup. Lottie realizes there's a reason she missed. Lottie was surprised that a good idea finally got through to her. The girl asked the spirits to help her, and they said there was no poison in the tea, and Lottie was right in her assumptions. The girl thanked her assistants. Lottie realizes that this was to be expected and she was right, but the problem is something else entirely. Time's up, and the princess is asked, can she come in to tell what she has learned? Lottie says she can come in, and the king enters with his subject to find out what his daughter wants to tell him. Lottie sees a strange man who smiles very wickedly, and the girl realizes that it is probably not a knight or a servant. The king says that Lottie can begin her report. Lottie says the king already knows the problem wasn't the tea, but it turns out that the problem was the water. The king says that's impossible because the water was from a spring. Lottie says that this water came from a spring created by fairies, and it gives energy to those who drink it, and it is the spring water that enhances the flavor of the food. This water is drunk by all members of the royal family, and it is also used in cooking. Besides, it's a good question why only the empress was hurt. Lottie wants to clarify that point. The water from the spring is not for weak people, and the problem arose because tea leaves were boiled in this water. Spring water does not mix well with brew, and the queen is one of the people in poor health in the palace. The king asks, does Lottie mean to say it's the spring water? The girl says that's right. The king asks the butler if there is any tea left. The butler says that in addition to the old tea, they have recently brought in new tea, so there is some in stock. The king says to make tea in spring water as soon as possible. Lottie realizes that she is ready to prove her innocence, but in order to do so, someone must drink the tea, and the girl realizes that this is the problem. The king is approached by a strange man who, with a mysterious smile, says that he apologizes, but it is not easy to prove that the problem is the mixing of products, and it will take a long time. In addition, the mysterious man says that Lottie should drink the tea herself, according to the man. Lottie realizes what the man is trying to say because she is the closest in health to the queen, and on the other hand, she is trying to prove her innocence. But the man still coerces her without naming these arguments. Lottie is now faced with the question whether she should refuse or have a drink. But the king resolves this conflict and says it's not necessary. The king says he will taste the tea himself. The butler speaks with horror. Does the king want to put himself in such danger? For perhaps the tea is truly dangerous. The man wants the king to let the butler drink the tea. They don't even know how to cure the disease. But the king keeps stalling and saying that if he's going to do something, he's going to do it to the end, and he thinks the princess knows the cure. Lottie smiles slyly and says that the king has understood her correctly, because the girl already knows what to do. The king is very good at noticing people's moods and realizes that Lottie is a very cunning daughter. The king turns to the mysterious man standing next to him and asks if this will be enough for Marquis Floyd. The man with a very dark face stands back and says that certainly the king is right. But Lottie notices that the man's face is crooked. Lottie thinks Floyd has something to do with the case. Lottie doesn't know if she's imagining it, but Floyd looks very angry. The king still drinks the tea, and people start to watch what is happening. The king does say that he does feel some strange sensations, but not enough to make him faint. Lottie says it's natural, and it's all because of the big difference in age and physical condition between His Majesty's body and the former queen's. Lottie says that this is the reason for the different symptoms. In the case of the king, there will only be a slight stomach ache. The king is amazed that there is truth in these words and asks about the queen. The king asks, Is the cause of such a serious condition the honorable age? Lottie says that this is probably not the case, and that it is rather the wrong approach and treatment methods that prevent the queen from recovering. Until now, prescriptions have been written on the basis of poisoning. The medics thought it was the poison that was to blame for the queen's condition. As the king realizes that if the wrong medicine is given, the patient's condition will worsen. The king tells the chamberlain to order a second examination and also to get the recipe for the right medicine from the princess and prepare it. The butler says that everything will be done as His Majesty says. Lottie is happy that she has finally been able to get the charges dropped. She can go back to her nice room with its nice furniture and eat good food and sleep and play. Lottie hopes that her life will finally get better and she will be able to do what she wants. In addition, Lottie thinks that maybe the king will want to reward her. Then she can ask the king for something, but the king comes up to the princess and says, the king bends over Lottie. The girl wonders how the king could approach her so quickly. Lottie says she listens to the king and wonders who could have given Lottie such knowledge. The king asks, was it really her? Lottie wonders who else is this mysterious lady called her. The king says again what he asked. Did Lottie get this knowledge from her? But Lottie doesn't know who she's talking about. So she just says with the sincerest possible smile that it was Lottie who taught herself everything. The king looked at Lottie carefully and then closed his eyes a little angrily but seriously and said that Lottie must be tired, and so the king would leave. Lottie finds herself in her Princess Majesty's palace and wonders if this small building is the place where the princess lives. But anyway, the building looks pretty sturdy. Lottie looks at the garden and wonders why it looks in a very sorry state. Lottie realizes that all her furniture could fall off at any moment, and she's in a terrible state. Very strange and both good and bad at the same time. Lottie thinks it's a dollhouse with a nice facade. She sees the bed and wonders why the room is so small, but it's still cozy enough compared to the prison cell Lottie used to be in. Lottie is a little surprised at what is happening and wants to ask the butler, how many people are introduced to Lottie? The man says he only knows of one maid. Lottie turns back where she heard very low footsteps and saw behind her a girl peeking out from under the door, almost crying and apologizing to the princess. The girl was waiting for her princess and hoped that Lottie would be here as soon as possible. The butler happily states that the princess's personal maid has just arrived and the girl was glad to see her. But he realizes that one maid is not enough for an entire palace. The butler says he's asking to be allowed to bow out and leave. Lottie found herself alone with her maid Betty. The girl says she knew that Lottie was incapable of poisoning the queen, and she tried to prove to everyone that Lottie was not guilty, but she was not believed. Lottie realizes that it is her personal maid who now needs to be calmed down, and Lottie tries to comfort the girl who was incredibly happy to see her mistress, which made her cry. Betty says that she is very glad that Lottie is back because she was so worried, but Betty says that Lottie is very quiet for some reason. Although the girl is usually quiet, Betty notices that something has changed in the princess. Lottie wonders, was she really that close to Betty in this life? That the girl wondered why Lottie didn't go all best friend on her. Lottie realizes that it's a huge disadvantage that the girl doesn't remember the memories of the real Lottie's life. She should remember these subtleties. But now her mind is completely blank. Lottie tries to figure out a way not to be discovered and says she's lost her memory and can't remember anything at all. Lottie realizes that if Betty is a close friend of the princess, this is her chance to find out everything she needs to know. Betty is incredibly surprised at Lottie's memory loss. Could it be because of Betty? The girl blames herself, because she failed to give the medicine for the daily dose, and now she is very upset that it has affected Lottie's memory loss. The girl falls on the floor and apologizes to Lottie because she should have taken care of it. Lottie says that Betty is wrong and that she should get off the floor. Lottie walks over to Betty and takes her hands. Lottie tells her maid that it was a real accident and Betty should not blame herself. Lottie hears that Betty has stopped crying, and the girl tells her mistress that Betty is the only maid in the palace. Lottie realizes that they seem to be much closer than Lottie thought before, so she can trust Betty. Lottie had thought lightly that the memory loss would not bother anyone. Lottie begins to hug Betty and apologize to her for scaring the girl so badly, and Lottie tries to convince Betty that it wasn't her fault. If Betty will calm down, Lottie asks the girl to help her recover her memories. Lottie tells Betty that she is the only one Lottie can trust. Betty smiles happily while in Lottie's arms and says that she would be happy to help her mistress. To summarize what Betty said, Lottie is now 15 years old, and Betty is her age. Above Lottie is the Crown Prince and Crown Princess, and Arkin is third in line of succession. Lottie is fourth, and the story makes it clear that there is a war for the throne between the Crown Princess and the Crown Prince, all because they are the same age and both are extremely talented. For example, Arkin is slightly inferior to the Crown Princess and Crown Prince in terms of qualities. Lottie realizes that Arkin is a much better kid than she thought, but Lottie doesn't understand why Arkin hates her. But maybe Arkin doesn't hate Lottie that much, because Lottie has seen more disgust from her father and her surroundings than from Arkin. But even that boy still expressed his displeasure to Lottie, even though he helped her. Lottie realizes that when it comes to her, there is nothing remarkable about her. Betty has kept this information to herself for a long time, but admits that Lottie is not really Her Majesty's child. Lottie was incredibly amazed by this fact. After all, she had asked the knight many times before whether she was a bastard. Lottie tells Betty that she has already heard that she is a legitimate child. Betty says that officially it is, and Lottie is officially recognized by all as His Majesty's daughter, and the events took place 10 years ago, and it is said that the king brought Lottie to the palace and declared her a daughter. Lottie thinks that's why she's so weak. However, Her Majesty has taken Lottie in as her own child and raised her. Lottie realizes that this is the end, and everything is ruined. Even if Betty knows about it, then absolutely everyone knows about it, so it's no secret that Lottie is a bastard. Lottie realized that when the king asked about Lottie's knowledge, he was referring to Lottie's own mother. Lottie now understood why she was hated by the queen and others, but why the king himself showed her such coldness. Why the king had adopted Lottie. Betty tells Lottie that's not the most important thing. Lottie asks what would surprise her more. Betty says in a little whisper that they don't have a morsel of food left and are left to starve. Lottie wonders if it's all real. Betty says there are some leftover sprouted potatoes to boil for dinner. Lottie realizes that she wouldn't want to eat that kind of food. Lottie tells Betty to let the maid get some rest and Mistress will find some groceries. Betty says that if she asks to work in another palace, she can earn a little money to buy some groceries for Mistress Lottie. Lottie says it's not necessary. Betty doesn't understand how Lottie is going to find groceries, but the mistress has already left and left Betty alone. Lottie comes up with a plan with Arkin, who has been very kind to her and thinks it would be perfect to bring the boy to visit her, to make him resent her. Why is her palace so dirty? And if he wants to sympathize with Lottie, then he can help her. When Lottie's plan was completed, the girls were able to eat a lot of food because Mr. Arkin gave them a huge amount of food. Arkin wonders. There are no cooks in Lottie's palace and the girls are starving. Betty says they're not starving because they haven't eaten anything for days, and that's totally different. But Arkin says it is starvation. Lottie asks, what's the reason Arkin's here? And the boy winks at his sister and says he was just a little worried. Lottie gets as close to her brother as possible and asks, was he really that worried? But Arkin, blushing with excitement and embarrassment, says that he was mistaken and that he was not really worried and that he thinks nothing wrong with letting Lottie in. But Lottie smiles at her brother and says she was worried about Arkin. The girl uses her soft smile to crush the little boy. Arkin felt Lottie's warmth and said it was really good that his sister was worried about his brother. The boy was embarrassed. Lottie says that they had to leave quickly so they didn't even talk, and besides, Lottie was afraid that the king would punish Arkin. Arkin tells Lottie that he's not in a position where his sister has to worry about him. Lottie realizes that Arkin is a real sweetheart. But the next moment, Lottie notices something strange on the prince's hand. Lottie took a closer look at Prince Arkin's crown sleeve and saw a strange burn mark there, and Lottie's knowledge from past lives allowed her to determine that this was what a fresh burn mark looked like. Lottie was surprised by this. When Lottie was alone, she began to think about what had happened. If he had been much older, she would not have worried, because men are often injured during battles or training. Lottie confesses to herself that she has always been aloof from society. Family and friends were always left behind because Lottie drew a line between herself and the rest of humanity. It was the only way she could fully immerse herself in science to fulfill the orders of the gods. But for Lottie, little children have always been the exception. After all, they're the only ones who desperately need help. So Lottie decides that she will help the boy no matter what it takes. Lottie's #1 goal now is not to die. Betty comes to Lottie and says she has to get ready. Lottie agrees and says she needs to get ready first. Betty wants to know where they are going today. Lottie cryptically says she needs to do some cleaning. When they finally arrive, Betty holds Lottie down with all her might. She was shaking and looked half dead. Lottie almost died on the way here. This is Prince Arkin's palace, and Lottie tells Betty there's something she needs to do here. Mr. Arkin's butler runs up to Lottie and apologizes for meeting Lottie late. He says he'll show Lottie into the drawing room. When Lottie was finally near the warm fireplace, and when she was handed a glass of water, Lottie drank it greedily. The butler says he brought what Lottie asked for from the prince, and Lottie thanks the butler. This is a list of servants and maids and other staff. This is a list of everyone who works in the princess's palace. Lottie realizes that there are a lot of strange things going on in her palace. First of all, there are actually a lot of rooms in the palace, but only a few are in use. The dining room cannot be entered, and the other open rooms have no furniture and absolutely no furniture at all. Secondly, there are practically no products, and the quality of those that are available is very poor. It's customary to allocate a lot of money to maintain the status of the imperial family. Lottie doesn't understand where the budget goes, so she asked for this list. Lottie asks Betty to get the list together. Lottie thanks the butler and says that she wanted to thank Prince Arkin in person, but the butler says that unfortunately the prince has a morning class right now, so he can't talk to Lottie. Lottie asks the butler what this wonderful lesson is, and the butler tells her it's world history. Lottie realizes it's no surprise that the young prince has a teacher. But Lottie also realizes that there's something wrong. Lottie asks the butler if she can attend this class, and the butler says that unfortunately he's afraid it will be difficult to do. Lottie realizes that when she saw the burn on the prince's sleeve, it made her worry, so she wants to tell the whole secret. The butler says that Viscount Polton doesn't like guests at his lessons. Lottie says she understands and there's nothing she can do anyway. Lottie thanks the butler for his help. The girl decides to use her cuteness to apologize to the butler and asks if she could get some more groceries, and she promises she'll pay it all back as soon as she gets next month's money. The butler says it's okay, and they live to help each other, so the butler asks if Lottie is looking for anything in particular so he can get her the groceries she needs. Lottie says Betty can check with the butler and Lottie will wait for them. Betty is a little perturbed because how will she do anything without her mistress? But Lottie approaches her maid and asks her to stall for time because Lottie has some things to find out. Betty says she'll do the task and do her best for her mistress. Betty leaves with the butler to see the necessary groceries, and Lottie finds herself alone with the maid the butler introduced to her. Lottie realizes that her intuition tells her that Arkin's burns have something to do with these lessons from the suspicious Polton. Lottie began to feel the energy of the spirit, and that was it. It confused her. Lottie tells her maid that she needs to go to the restroom and asks the woman to give her some privacy. The woman says she can take Lottie to the right place. But when the girl turned around, Lottie started to run away because she sensed something wrong. Lottie sensed the magic and burst into the room the prince was supposedly in. Lottie saw Polton standing next to and with Crown Prince Arkin and a fire raging around them. Arkin asks what Lottie is doing here. And Lottie, smiling triumphantly, says she accidentally got the wrong room because she thought it was the restroom. Lottie meets Polton's gaze and realizes that now she has uncovered the man who tortured the young prince. Now she can tell everyone the truth. In addition, the maid came in with Lottie, and seeing what was going on in the room. Lottie starts to make excuses and comes closer to Polton and says that she found out that Arkin is in history class. but Lottie thinks there aren't enough books for a history class. Lottie smilingly looks at Polton, whom she has unmasked. Lottie believes that Polton is standing right in front of her. Lottie realizes that Polton's spirit energy is being felt here. The man is using fire magic to punish Prince Arkin. To become a spirit guardian like Polton, one must not only have the ability to see spirits, but also possess magic. The prerequisite is to be born with special qualities, and because of the preciousness of this gift, there have been many frauds. There was no way to increase the connection to the spirit before, but the crooks have succeeded in doing so, and it's obvious that it's related to the Arcan powers. Polton told His Highness that he could bring the fire closer to him, and he could increase the connection with his spirit. Polton shouted that he was talking about an unusual fire and the calling of the fire spirit. If he can use the spirit of fire, will he be able to become a guardian, because Arkin wants to prove to his father that he is strong. Polton said the prince should believe him and the boy would succeed. Polton was a real crook for deceiving the prince. Arkin starts telling Lottie to get out, because how dare she come into his room? Arkin thinks that Polton is training him so that the boy can become a spirit guardian. The princess apologizes and says she'll go, but before she does, she at least asks Arkin something. Lottie apologizes to Polton and she was too rude. Lottie asks if Polton can forgive her rudeness, and the girl reaches out to shake Polton's hand. The man says it goes without saying, and although Lottie's apology is not very polite, it must be due to the fact that Lottie has spent a lot of time in prison. The trickster holds out his hand and says he accepts the princess's apology. The Viscount shakes Lottie's hand, and an electric shock goes through his body that stuns the Viscount. Polton falls to his knees and doesn't understand how a half-blood princess can have such powerful powers. Lottie uses her spiritual energy to punish Polton. Polton doesn't understand how Lottie could be so strong because Polton has a contract with a mid-level spirit. Lottie realizes that a guardian who has a contract with a mid-level spirit can't easily resist Lottie's much stronger power. She's the person who made the contract with the King of Spirits, and there's no one higher than Lottie in the hierarchy. Arkin sees that Polton is very ill and asks how he is feeling. But Polton is clearly unconscious, and Lottie comes to Arkin. To explain everything, the princess says that you can't increase your connection to a spirit by exposing it to the spirit of fire. Arkin asks how Lottie knows about these subtleties, and Lottie tells him that Polton used a classic scam. Lottie kicks Polton's head in and tells him that the man cheated Arkin and he took advantage of the boy's desperation. But Arkin becomes indignant and says that it can't be because Polton said that if Arkin binds himself to the fire spirit, he will gain a connection to the Celesta. Arkin is referring to the name of a mid-level fire spirit. The boy starts to cry and says that he wants to be deceived and unrecognized. Lottie hugs Arkin and says it will be okay. You don't have to get a confession and let Arkin not even think about it. Lottie tries to reassure the boy and says that he is amazing in his own right. There's no need to go down a path that doesn't suit Arkin. The boy can find another path. It could be one that is fun and interesting. Arkin says that Lottie is bleeding and the girl stares at her hand, which is bleeding from her face. Lottie can't stand up anymore and falls down in front of Arkin. When Lottie finally opened her eyes, she was in bed, and Betty was running around her screaming that at last Mistress had opened her eyes. Betty tearfully says that Lottie has no idea how worried the maid was about her mistress. Betty tells that Lottie had a sudden fall and didn't regain consciousness for 2 days. Lottie wonders, did she really lose consciousness for 2 days after a little effort of her spirit? Apparently, this body is totally unsuited to her spiritual power, and it needs training. Lottie realizes that she is in too luxurious a room, and she has not been here before. Betty goes for a hug from Mistress, while Lottie asks where they are. Prince comes into the room and says they are at his house. Turns out it's his brother, and Lottie was happy to see him. Lottie asks Betty to come out for a minute while she talks to Arkin. Lottie asks if the boy is okay. Arkin says he's fine, and Lottie next wants to know what happened to Polton. Arkin tells her that Polton was fired because of his incompetence. Lottie says that Polton deserves to be publicly punished. Aren't they going to tell His Majesty? Arkin clenches his fists and starts crying. He says that if he tells, he'll look like a real simpleton who's been cheated. Arkin talks about his brother and sister who don't communicate with him, and everyone will be annoyed when they find out that Arkin has been tricked. The boy starts to sob, and Lottie asks him to sit next to her. Lottie begins to comfort the boy and says that Arkin has done nothing wrong. Lottie says that people can make mistakes, and little children make them even more often than others. Lottie loves her brother and says it's not his fault, and he was just trying to find an answer. Arkin says he's very lonely, but Lottie tries to comfort her brother and say it's okay, because Lottie's going to be there for Arkin now. Lottie will worry about Arkin. She will also praise him and sometimes hug him like she does now. Lottie promises that Arkin will be fine from now on. The boy has never felt such warmth, and his sister has truly given him hope. Arkin admits he was angry, until he felt the real love and warmth his sister gave him. When Arkin calms down a bit, he apologizes for calling Lottie a dirty blood. Lottie smiles and says that Arkin is just a baby, so it's no big deal. Arkin is not very happy to say that he is already 10 years old, and he is not a little kid anymore. Lottie is even a little surprised that Arkin is already 10 years old. Arkin points his finger accusingly at Lottie and says that she should stay here until she is stronger and calls her a dumb girl. Lottie sees Arkin leave and realizes that the boy looks much younger than his years. A butler enters the princess's room and asks the lady to let him in. Lottie asks the butler why the man lied to her. The butler bows to Lottie and apologizes, then says he will accept any punishment Lottie may receive. Lottie says she will ask the question differently because she is not interested in punishing the butler and wants to know why he didn't tell His Majesty what was going on. Lottie says that Arkin was out of line, but it was still necessary to inform the king. The butler says he actually asked for an audience with His Majesty many times, but Aaron always refused. Lottie asks if Floyd could not have informed the queen or her maid, but Her Majesty was traveling in the provinces and the maid died. Lottie realizes that relations in this family are not good at all, but it can't be helped, and she will tell the king everything and not let Arkin be punished. The butler bows to Lottie, seeing her kindness, and says he thanks the princess. Lottie asks the butler to look up, but the man looks at Lottie and starts to cry. After a while, Betty knocks on Lottie's door and tells her that the mistress has visitors. Lottie wonders who might need her. The chamberlain comes to Lottie and says that Her Majesty wishes to see the princess. Lottie realizes that she can't even rest because the events are piling up on her. When Lottie arrived, the chamberlain said that this was Her Majesty's palace and that Lottie should follow him to come to the queen. The chamberlain tells her that Her Majesty the Queen is walking in the garden. Lottie asks that they should probably go to the queen now, but the chamberlain smiles sweetly at the girl and says that Lottie should visit a few places first. Lottie thought she was being tested for poison, but it turns out that Lottie was brought into the shower and bathed. Lottie doesn't understand why she is being treated as if she were going to her new husband instead of the queen. The maids ask the princess if the water is warm enough. Another maid brings Lottie something to drink. After all this happened, Lottie was dressed up as if she were a little doll and even chose accessories for her. The maids asked Lottie which accessories she preferred. Lottie realizes that if she sells one of these precious accessories, she won't go hungry for a month. But still, Lottie suspects something is wrong. Lottie wonders to the servants, why did they give her dresses and why is all this happening? Is it such a sign of hospitality? The maid says it's Her Majesty's orders to give Princess Lottie's dress and jewelry as an apology for Lottie being accused unjustly of poisoning. Lottie realizes that these maids are also victims. Lottie remembers Arkin saying that there were maids who testified against her. Lottie tells the maids that after meeting with Her Majesty, she will make a decision. When Lottie approached the queen, the woman was talking to her servant and said that in the last few days, the Briars have been rebelling and asking for a man to increase their wages. A Briar is a specialist in horse training and riding. The maid brings Lottie and tells Her Majesty that the princess has arrived. The man who spoke to the queen says she has a guest, so he leaves her, and the queen tells Lottie to come to her. The queen's name is Rowell, and she greets Lottie with a smile. From Betty, Mrs. Lottie learns about how the current king came to the throne, that His Majesty has a solid foundation, the queen has abdicated. Lottie doesn't know, does such a man care about a helpless girl like Lottie? When the queen said hello to Lottie, they decided to sit down at the table. As Lottie sat there, she felt someone's eyes on her. The maid is worried that the situation might happen again, but the girl is so openly expressing her contempt that it is beginning to annoy Lottie. When the queen brings a mug of tea to her face, Lottie apologizes and asks the queen to let Lottie be the first to taste the tea, for Lottie would die at the maid's glance behind her. The queen was incredibly surprised by this joke and laughed out loud. The queen apologizes to Lottie and says that this maid is very young, and from her childhood, years was very straightforward and nothing has changed now. Lottie says that she is nevertheless sure that the maid is one of those who can distinguish between public and private affairs. The queen, with a sly look in her eyes, says it goes without saying. The maid, red with shame, bowed and apologized. After all, they had no proof, but they continued to suspect Lottie of what had happened. Lottie says she forgives the maids. Of course, she should have been very hesitant about such things, but instead Lottie asks that the maids continue to serve Her Majesty diligently. The maids thank Princess Lottie and say that she will follow her words. The queen says that Lottie forgave more easily than she thought. The queen also mentions that Lottie could have fussed a bit longer. Lottie says that if she were really angry, the queen would stop their conversation immediately. Lottie realizes that she should not forget that she is only a child, and children are very impulsive here. Even the emperor said so. Lottie realizes that she is definitely not allowed to play with fire. Lottie smiles slyly and asks the queen if the woman is interested in anything else. The queen says that Lottie refused the gift. Roel wonders what exactly Lottie wants. Lottie realizes that she has refused a gift that they will not remember for a long time. Lottie would like to enjoy tea with Her Majesty. Her need to demand something that will create a bond between them. If Lottie succeeds in becoming the queen's friend, it will be unbelievably beautiful. Roel says she's free for the day. But why does Lottie want to spend time with Roel? Lottie doesn't think long about the answer and happily says like a little child that she wants to get closer to her grandmother. Roel starts laughing and says that this is truly amazing. Before, Lottie was a completely different child. Lottie explains that it was because Lottie almost died in prison and decided to rethink everything. Lottie's been through a big ordeal and thinks that's the reason she's changed. Roel smiles and, looking at Lottie, says she asks that her granddaughter let her ask a question. Roel says she heard Lottie run off while walking and shout something in an ancient language. Lottie choked on her tea and wondered, was she really shouting something in an ancient language? Lottie remembered that she had called out a strike to the gods and realized that she had indeed spoken in an ancient language. Lottie was surprised to find herself so reckless. The girl does not know how to justify her deed to Roel and needs to think of something quickly. Lottie realizes that Lundo is her native language and the language from Lottie's first life, and this language is now considered ancient. After being reborn, Lottie used a familiar language. The queen asks, is it an ability that arose on the brink of life and death, or is Lottie just recovering her old memories? Lottie wonders, has her body lost its memory before? The queen says she's too busy for a tea party, but she can give Lottie a present. Roel holds out his bracelet to Lottie and says they'll see what the girl can really do. Lottie thanks Roel for the lovely gift and smiles sweetly like a real child. But Lottie realizes she's come to see Roel for more than that. How is Her Highness's health? And Roel says she's better. Lottie asks if she can check on Roel's health. After all, if the queen knows the names, Lottie has suggested a cure for her. The queen agrees, and Lottie says it won't take long. So she asks Roel to let her touch her hand. Lottie says she needs to find out some details and asks Roel if she has a chronic illness. And Lottie wonders if Roel has had a serious illness before. Roel asks, is it really that obvious because they tried to poison her? Because of the poison she took, she still can't regain all her strength. It's a miracle that Roel survived, although she still faints a lot. Lottie asks if Roel knows about mandrake. Roel says of course she does because it's an ingredient for wizards. Lottie says that mandrake can also be used as a medicinal remedy by drinking a strong brewed root. It restores lost energy, and the most effective is mandrake from the south of the continent, which is very expensive to obtain, but it is truly effective. Lottie asks if she can get some mandrake if the queen will take some for herself as well. Roelle smiles and says that if she finds the mandrake roots, she will gladly give them to Lottie. Roelle is very surprised and asks how her granddaughter knows all these things. And Lottie says she's read a lot of books and smiles as if any child could know such things. When Lottie did get the mandrake, she was incredibly horrified. It was a huge challenge to get and prepare the mandrake, but drinking the root was even worse. But Lottie realizes she has to do it, so she takes a deep breath and drinks the contents of the can. Lottie realizes it tastes like real poison, but she had to do it. Betty asks Lottie, "Did Mistress really have to drink that mandrake?" And Lottie confirms that she had to. After all, yesterday she drank and was able to walk easily for 10 minutes, and if Lottie continues the mandrake treatment, she will get better and better each time. Betty also notices some strange list and asks Lottie what it is. Lottie says that it is a list of people who are attached to Lottie's palace and are Betty's colleagues. Betty wonders, are there really so many people in this palace, but why are they not out of their positions? Lottie wants to ask. Is Betty's salary being given out in Lottie's name? And Betty confirms that this is true, and she receives her salary from Her Highness Lottie. Labor and drug costs. Those two items were the highest costs. But there is no one else but Betty, and also Lottie's medication is not suitable. Lottie realizes that her weak body makes it easy to cheat on the price of medication. And the next big expenses were shrubs and flowers. But everything in the yard is in a deplorable condition, and it turns out that this is real corruption. From the first day, they brought the cheapest and worst and just planted in the ground, and thus stole a lot of money. Lottie finds one important name on the list and asks who this Leold Dean is. Betty says it is Baron Leold Dean. Betty says that he is a good man, and he often came and checked on the mansion and even helped Betty. Lottie wonders, is this the man who stole her money? Lottie smiles understandingly and tells Betty that they will find out. Lottie asks Betty to help her. After a while, Leold Dean starts to run away and gets caught. The man who was chasing the Baron asks why Leold Dean is running away, because he wants Leold Dean to give him his money because the man hasn't paid back all his debts for a long time. Leold Dean asks the man to calm down and doesn't understand why his interlocutor is so worried. Leold Dean says that he will soon return the money to the man and that he should not worry because he has been a guest of the gambling house for 10 years. The man says it's not something to brag about. Leold Dean says the man in question knows who Leold Dean can take money from. Therefore, let him not worry. For this dirty cow has a great deal of wealth that Leold Dean will use for his own purposes. The interlocutor says that from above, the bad news is that it is rumored that Lottie has been caught in Her Majesty's sight. The interlocutor says that Leold Dean stole a huge amount of money, and there must have been impunity just because no one from the imperial family was looking at Lottie. Leold Dean is trying to calm his interlocutor and tell him not to worry about it because it's just a rumor, and he'll still be able to steal from the girl. The interlocutor says that we can only hope, because besides him, there are many people who are interested in rumors. Turns out that Betty started spreading rumors that Lottie and Roelle were having tea together. How did this filthy tart attract the Empress's attention? Leold Dean realizes that he must make things right, because he doesn't want to lose his permanent and large income. The dirty-blooded girl Leold Dean knew was a stupid and immature little girl. Her self-esteem was shattered. Leold Dean tells Lottie that her mother was as insecure as her daughter, and it is best not to approach other members of the imperial family because Lottie is too incapable. Leold Dean was talking Lottie's ear off and saying that the girl should realize that only Leold Dean cared about her. Leold Dean was telling Lottie that he was the only one the little girl could trust. It's been the same situation for all 10 years, and Leold Dean can't lose his life. After all, if his deception is found out, he will be killed for such a large corruption. Leold Dean tries to reassure himself that Floyd will not abandon Leold Dean. Marquis Floyd has been a close friend of Leold Dean's for a long time, and the man hopes that he can continue to rely on him. When Leold Dean came to Lottie, The girl used all her childlike directness to avoid arousing Leold Dean's suspicions. Leold Dean says he hasn't seen Lottie in a long time and it's good to see her. Leold Dean hears that Lottie has lost her memory, so he apologizes and says he has to introduce himself again. Leold Dean says his name is Leold Dean, and he is in charge of Her Highness Lottie's palace, so the girl can rely on him for all the necessary things. Lottie immediately notices the necessary things hanging on Leold Dinu. Lottie sees a locket with 3 flowers on it. Lottie says she is pleased to meet you and says she wants to introduce herself as Leold Dean. Lottie tries to show her insecurity and stiffness in her movements. Leold Dean is looking at Lottie. He's playing his part perfectly and doesn't realize that Lottie has changed dramatically. Leold Dean thinks that even if a man has lost his memory, he doesn't change. Leold Dean says he heard about the unpleasant incident and he had to find Lottie. Leold Dean was late. Because his grandmother had gone to God, and to make it more believable, Leold Dean even let out a tear. Of course, the truth is that his grandmother passed away 3 years ago, but Lottie would rather not know that information. Lottie exclaims very loudly that this is a real tragedy, and she tries to comfort Leold Din and says that if she had known, she should have been more concerned about her friend Leold Din, and so apologizes to the man. Leold Dean realizes that if he has succeeded in tricking Lottie, everything is going great, and is surprised that Lottie has even become more obedient. Lottie, with all her childlike directness, says she has a question for the Baron and asks why the palace is so badly run. Lottie had heard from another maid that the money is not brought in every month, and Lottie was very worried about it. Leold Dean was incredibly scared out of his wits because Lottie had just asked a very uncomfortable question that Leold Dean did not want to answer. The man says it was just all done for Her Highness, and so Lottie shouldn't be worried. Leold Dean says that most of the money is for Lottie's medicine, and didn't Lottie order the landscaping of the palace, which took a huge amount of maintenance. Leold Dean holds out the expense sheet for Lottie to see where the money goes. Leold Dean realizes that he exaggerated a bit, but Lottie couldn't see it because she has lost her memory. Lottie admits that it was all her fault and apologizes to Leold Dean. Leold Dean says it's all right. The princess shouldn't worry. Inside, Leold Dean realizes that the princess is a real dumbass, and it's beautiful to see how she continues to starve and has no medicine because Leold Dean takes all the money for himself and Lottie continues to not notice anything. The next moment, Leold Dean notices how the precious metal glistens and sees a very precious bracelet lying on Lottie's desk. Could it be the bracelet Her Majesty has worn since her youth? They spend more than just tea time, and the princess gets her favorite bling. But it turns out that Her Majesty gives Lottie such great gifts. Leold Dean realizes that if Roel and Lottie are so close, they are dangerous to Leold Dean, and Leold Dean thinks that it is necessary to use this information to get out of it. Leold Dean hopes that he can find out from Lottie important information that the girl could have learned from Roel, and if he knows these political actions, he will be able to capitalize on the information and really get rich. Leold Dean starts casting a line and says that there are rumors that Lottie has become close to Her Majesty. Lottie says that ever since she lost her memory, Roel has started taking care of her. Lottie says that Roel gave her a bracelet and told her many stories. Lottie says she learned a lot about politics as well as history. Even though she doesn't understand anything, it was very interesting to listen to Roel. Leold Dean realizes that the fish is biting, and it is truly incredible and amazing how all the events come together in a qualitative way to make Leold Dean even richer. Leold Dean says he understands and asks what Lottie talked about with Her Majesty, and asks if Lottie can tell a little about their conversations. Leold Dean tries to lie and says that Lottie used to always tell everything that happened. Leold Dean puts his hand on his heart and says that he always leaves Lottie's secrets unspoken, and 10 years Tom has become Lottie's confidant. Leold Dean says he is always happy to talk to Her Highness, so hopefully Lottie can share secrets. And then Lottie realizes that her fish has bitten this time, and she says that Leold Dean should know that Her Majesty has said that the duties on tobacco leaves with petrol acid will soon be raised. Leold Dean realizes that this is great information, and how Lottie was able to tell from the very first minute of the conversation what Leold Dean can get rich off of. Tobacco leaves are most popular with the nobility as an imported commodity. It is obvious that a sudden increase in duty would raise the price of the product to sky high. Leal Dean has to buy everything on the market right now and not buy enough of everything. He definitely heard something at the playhouse. Leal Dean thinks it would be ideal to head to a port called Dawn. Leal Dean stands up, and Lottie asks why the man has risen so abruptly. Leal Dean continues to smile at Lottie and says that he remembered some very urgent business, so he has to go. When Leal Dean left the office, he was incredibly happy that he was able to get such valuable information, and he ran away to spend all his money on tobacco. Lottie smiled nastily when she was left alone and quietly said that the Baron had been caught. Now, Lottie was truly satisfied with the work she had done, and her revenge would be as sweet as the sweetest honey Lottie had ever tasted in her many lives. After a while, Lottie took the mandrake again, and after she got over the unpleasant taste of the drink, she asked what Betty, who was standing behind Mistress, wanted from her. Betty wondered how Lottie knew Betty wanted to tell her something, and Lottie turns to Betty to tell the girl that Betty always sneaks up on her when there is some question. Betty says that Baron Polton stole the money from Lottie and that the deception cannot be kept secret. Betty doesn't understand why Lottie didn't tell the Emperor about it. Lottie says that if she tells, she can't return the stolen money to the treasury. Lottie's a victim, but she can't pay back a dime. Lottie says they'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone, if not 3. Lottie gets the money, the medicine, and the Emperor's trust, which is Lottie's goal. Meanwhile, when the Emperor was in his study while Lottie was planning her deceitful machinations with the money, the Emperor was very sad. The man took his head in his hands, and images of Lottie's mother appeared in his mind. And he couldn't get her out of his mind, no matter how hard Aaron tried. But that girl appeared in his memories every time he saw Lottie. It was the same wheat field, and also that bright kiss when the sun was setting and it illuminated everything. It was the only time in his life that Aaron had ever felt true love. Aaron also remembers meeting Lottie, who was his child. Aaron learns that Mother can no longer raise the child, so he asks that Lottie be taken away to be raised. The child was soaked to the skin and can't remember anything but her name and age. The king's headache has not subsided since his meeting with Lottie. When the council met to decide, one of the men said that Lottie should not be made a princess. After all, His Majesty has 2 children by the Empress, and the king must make a wise decision. Floyd said he hoped the king wouldn't abandon his sister, but the king said Lottie was his daughter, and he didn't care what others said. The king is in charge and has the right to decide on family matters and let the filthy aristocrats not even dare to look in the direction of people dear to the king. The girl was growing slowly, and Tana King gave her medicine and food, but it didn't help. The king did not know that Leal Dean was stealing all the money the king had set aside for his daughter. Aaron hoped for Lottie's speedy recovery and wanted her to become healthy and strong, and he hoped so much that she wouldn't disappear. All of Aaron's thoughts were only of her. At last, the war that had dragged on for years was over, and Aaron slowly sorted out the remaining problems. But suddenly, the king learned of the former queen's poisoning. Aaron sought proof of the false accusation, but Lottie cleared her own name, and the king was surprised that the daughter knew the recipe for the cure for the queen, because it turned out as if the girl's real mother shared this knowledge with her daughter, who has a gift from her blood mother.